Welcome, everyone. It's wonderful to have you here for this Early Career Researcher Workshop. This is part of the GLASSNET Network of Networks activity funded by the National Science Foundation. You can see up here the various networks involved, about a dozen networks from different countries, based in different countries, based in different disciplines. And it's a long-term project funded by the National Science Foundation. And at our last PI meeting in Washington, D.C., with all of these different networks of networks that are being funded by the National Science Foundation, I saw how some of these networks were having workshops organized by students and early career scholars responding to the special interests of early career scholars. So we decided to ask several of our GLASSNET fellows, Vartika Singh is one of those, to organize a series of these workshops. So that's the genesis of this. Something to keep in mind, you can go to glassnet.net to find out more about GLASSNET, but we have important part of this is opportunity to travel and engage with other disciplines and other centers, travel from the US overseas or from overseas to the US. And those opportunities Vartika took advantage of, as well as others. It's a great opportunity to learn, to build on the kinds of things you'll learn about in this workshop. So Vartika, I'm turning it over to you and take it away.
Thank you, Tom, for the wonderful introduction. And I would like to get started by giving like a really quick introduction of this workshop. Thank you, everybody, for joining, and apologies for starting about 9 minutes late. But you know, for all of you who are here, I think the goal of this session that we wanted to do was to organize a learning session for all of us on how to work with transdisciplinary topics, transdisciplinary teams, as more and more conversion and convergence towards our work is being sought. So, you know, the goal of the session was to get like a broader perspective in shaping our research endeavors as we move like further in our careers. I have 3 speakers with me today, and I'm really thankful for all of them to agreeing to join with me and, you know, share their perspectives and give their experiences. And I will introduce the speakers one by one. The format is very casual. It's not a research presentation. So I'm hoping that we can have more interaction with the speakers who will share with us their immense knowledge and experiences on working with global projects and across disciplines over the years. So in no particular order, but I requested our speakers to kind of, you know, like work around the topics that we had discussed. We want to start first with Aline Mosnier. She's our first speaker. And I'll talk about the others when I call them out. So we have Aline Mosnier, we have Michael Crawford, and Avinash Kishore from 3 different institutions, 3 different regions, and they are here with us to share their insights, and we will give them each about 10 minutes to share their thoughts and ideas with or without slides. And then after their talk, we will have some opportunity to ask questions, and I will encourage everyone to reach out and ask as many questions as you want or any clarifications. And I hope that, you know, this session is engaging and meaningful for all of us. So I'd introduce Aline Mosnier first. She's the scientific director of the FABLE Consortium, and she has a PhD in environmental economics from the University of Vienna. She has an excellent record in model development and training and working with cross-country teams. She's from France. And Aline is going to talk about working with partners from different countries and setting up international consortium and research groups. That is her expertise, using the example of the FABLE Consortium. Aline, here you go. I will time about 10 minutes, and maybe I'll give like a angry emoji or something when the time is getting up, so you're aware, and a couple of minutes here and there should work. And I will mute since my daughter is now speaking up. So go ahead, Aline, please.
Thank you very much, Vartika, for the invitation to talk today. So indeed, I don't have any slides prepared, and I try to stick to the 10 minutes. If I do not react, please speak to let me know that my time is over. So indeed, Vartika asked me to talk a bit about this experience on collaborating with different countries and setting up this international consortium like FABLE. And also, since this is an early career researchers workshop, I thought that maybe it could be a good time to reflect also a bit on my own career and also what brought me to indeed work with these different countries in Fable. So maybe just as the start, I think that already when I was a student, that one of the key questions that I had was really like how to ensure that policies which are put in place in a country are beneficial not only to the country itself, but also to the rest of the planet. And this was a bit in the context when I was a student, for example, of the discussions around the subsidies for farmers. So I come from a rural area. I was surrounded by farmers, and at the same time, there was this discussion about this is unfair, that European farmers get these subsidies, and then at the end, like our exports, impede the development of the farmers in developing countries and so on. And we had all the negotiations around at the WTO and so on around these issues. And I think that this was something really that is still important for me today. This question of assessing the policies in the global context, but also, of course, with a deep understanding of how things work in the country, and also because policymakers in the country want to do their best, especially for their country, and also have some kind of mandate for their citizens to improve their livelihoods. Then I thought that indeed, like to do this modeling tools are great, right? Because they allow you to test things while they haven't happened yet and while they are not yet implemented, and to give you a sense of how things could evolve if you take some actions. So this also, I think, explain why quite early I thought that working with these models could be quite useful to have at the same time trying to get this deep understanding of how things work and also more research angle, but also at the same time be useful for policy making. So I started to work on GloBiome, especially after when I joined IASA, and there I really try to find a way to have these two characteristics: detailed enough representation of a country or a region to have to be useful for local decision making, but also the global framework, so that we can have this linkage and this representation of what would be the impact outside of the countries or region where the policies are taken, and or vice versa. So I started to work on Congo Basin, Brazil, Indonesia, Ethiopia. I tried to zoom in the GloBiome model, try to detail these different regions inside. It required a lot of work, collecting better data for the country, learning about each context to be able to better represent some process, and twisting the models a lot. So also learning a lot about the models and what they can do. So this was really exciting work, and I learned so much through this process. So that was great. But what is left after the study or after a project is finalized? And here, well, it was usually a nice report, and but when we started to present that in the countries with stakeholders and so on, which was also quite interesting, well, half of the report already said things that people knew. They were about their context, they live there. So already it was lucky enough if I didn't say anything stupid, but that was not something really new to them. Then, okay, some stakeholders learn a bit more about the knowledge, the model, how it works, and some mechanisms maybe they didn't think about before. But most often, these stakeholders change position even during the year. So the people who attending the two workshops at the beginning and the end were not the same. And also at the end, there was a long list of what needs to be improved to be really useful in the country context. Finally, in many countries, language was still a barrier. So either we needed to have a translator, or really also it reduced a lot the number of people who could be invited to this workshop because of they needed to understand English. So at the end, that really led, I think, to this concept or this approach of having and developing much more partnerships with local organizations within country to hopefully build more long-term capacity to do this type of work, save time also, because like at least all the work on getting to know the context, well, this is normally already done, let's say by people who live there and know well what are the issues. And then after, of course, like a project ends, but after the institutes remain, the knowledge remains, and they are better equipped also to be ready for the next one. So maybe just here, sharing also some experience there. We had a nice project which was called Right Back by then, and working with Brazil and Congo Basin. And in Brazil, I think it was quite interesting. So we worked with researchers from INPE to build the Globiome Brazil model. And I think that here, the conditions were that the team was already quite skilled in programming and modeling. But also they knew very well like what was the policy environment and also what would be acceptable by the policymakers when they would look at the modeling results. So they knew that we had really to work on the model and to make it work well on some aspects. And for INPE, it was really like trying to work well on the deforestation and try to reproduce the past deforestation trends. We worked 3 years, I think, just on the model development, and also because we had to learn the model and so on. But also with exactly always like this strong view about what are the minimum conditions for the model to be used for the policy impacts. And then the opportunity came, and because they were also connected with the policy side to inform the Brazilian declaration at the COP Paris and so on. And there it intensified, right? There were many meetings required between the modeling team, between the policy side, and to change some assumption in the model really last minute to give results that could be used at the end. And of course, all these meetings were in Portuguese, all these meetings were in Brazil and so on. So it was so important to have a team there who could drive this process. So when people say that, oh, okay, like for example, funding agency saying everything should be demand driven. So if the governments do not express, you know, the need to have modeling teams there, then we should not invest there. I would say so wrong, because usually when the policymakers realize that they need the results, they need it for tomorrow or yesterday. And if you don't have the skills there and the teams being built there, then there is no chance. There is no chance that somebody from the country can inform this process. So this is, I think, a bit the genesis of Fable, and why at the end we thought that it was very important to have a network of researchers from the different countries, but also to try to connect them, still to keep this global, this connection between the local and global scale. So there were 2 efforts that we made. One was to lower a bit the entry cost, like the barriers to start with a model. So to have maybe a model a bit simpler at the beginning, and also that could provide results a bit faster for a specific country, and that you don't need this 3 years investment that we did, for example, for Brazil, at least for the start. So this is why we built this Fable calculator. Then after there was this infrastructure on the Senaton and the global to connect with the trade, the different teams. So this was more on the modeling infrastructure. But then after, there is also the question of, in the countries, who do we engage? Which institutes do we engage? Which researcher, you know, can be interested, can have the skills to do that? So I think that here this is still something which is challenging to find the people. Like modeling is still niche, and so it's not everybody who is interested, who is familiar with it, and so it requires time to find the right person. But I think at least the experience with Fable is that we started somewhere where it was maybe the easiest. And then after, we need to navigate, learn, and strengthen these partnerships, open, and the teams grow by itself, learn by itself, and so on. And so I think that at the end, maybe my main conclusion about working with these different countries and this large consortium was the flexibility was so important, because it's a continuous learning process. There are a lot of turnovers, there are a lot of changes which can happen on the policy side in a country, also in the researchers, of course, people leave, go, projects stop, and so on. But at the end, I think try to be resilient by having this diversity, and these different partnerships is an important component, and I think that still works. Maybe another thing is that also how to work together. So it helps, of course, to have a common tool. So then it's people can exchange on the tool. But not only, I would think that also now we just participated in a proposal now with different country teams. I think that at the end it was 9 partners. First of all, it's very rare that we have the chance to have an opportunity for funding that can also address this multiplicity of teams and countries. And I think we should have more. But just to say that here also I think one of the challenge, but also the main interesting thing is to see, okay, each person come with a different background and a different expertise. And then so that's great. If this person can contribute with their expertise to something that then at the end can be connected, can connect all these pieces and can be shared, then it's we also see the true value of this type of collaborations. So maybe I stop here. Yeah?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, your timer was just getting over. Thank you. Thank you, Aline. I have a couple of follow-up questions on this, but maybe we'll wait for the time when other speakers have also had an opportunity to talk, and then we pool together questions both from me as well as from the participants that we have online. Thank you very much for sharing that perspective. I think it really helps set the tone of this workshop, because our next presenter, Michael Crawford, is actually going to get into the more details of working on models which look at various different aspects. And to clarify for all the participants here, the FABLE consortium that Aline talked about, this is Food, Agriculture, Biodiversity, Land Use and Energy Consortium. It's actually at the crux of Food, Water, Land, Energy Nexus, so as transdisciplinary as it can get. And we'll have we'll hear or talk a little bit more about it in the Q&A session. I will now move to our next speaker, Michael Crawford. He's a senior researcher at the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research in Potsdam, Germany. He holds a PhD in ecology from the University of Potsdam and currently works at the intersection of environment, land, food, energy nexus. He's from the US. Again, I'm highlighting where people are from just to present the diversity of speakers that we have here, because I'm very excited about the group that we've gotten together. Mike is going to talk about his experience of working with different models, specifically integration across data sources, methods, and topics, using the example from Food Systems Economics Commission that him and like myself, we've recently all worked together. So thank you very much, Mike, and you can start now. Thank you.
Thanks, Vartika. I hope that you'll forgive me that I think my presentation sits at 12 minutes or something. But okay.
Should work. Thank you. Go ahead.
Let me find it. Okay. Tell me if this works.
Yes.
Good. Okay, cool. Okay. So hi, everyone, and thank you. So today I'm going to discuss the value of conducting research using large multi-model frameworks, as Vartika said, specifically through the example of the Food System Economics Commission. So in this project, we put together 7 models to study the intricacies of a food system transformation. While I'm going to give a quick overview of how the research was structured, I'm not really going to go into detailed results. For this, I'm going to be more specifically discussing one aspect of the work, how a dietary transition away from livestock products impacts almost every aspect of our multi-model framework. So this, I hope, will suggest the power of transdisciplinary research, especially for studying land use, human health, and environmental sustainability. Then I'm going to do a brief tangent where I talk about the shared socioeconomic pathways, which are one of the most important concepts undergirding integrated assessments and helping coupled models be more consistent with one another. Okay, so in this project, we wanted to develop a vision for the kind of sustainable transformation that's possible for the food system, given the biogeophysical and technological limitations of feeding a world population that's going to be about 9 billion people in 2050. Our goals for this project were to include in the model consumption of healthy diets for everyone, strong livelihoods throughout the food system, protection of intact land and restoration of degraded land, and environmentally sustainable production throughout the food system. So, as you can already tell, that was a wide array of goals that span many systems. So to study this in an internally consistent way, we had to link many independent models together in an integrated framework. So we specifically studied two pathways, one business as usual, which we're calling current trends, and then another one called the food system transformation. The FST was made up of 17 different measures. Each of these measures taken to achieve some kind of food system goal is within the modeling framework driven by assumption. So to take this first measure here, eliminating undernutrition as an example, we aren't stipulating what real life steps to take or policies to promote. We are just saying we know how many calories a person needs to maintain a healthy weight on average, and how many people there will be over the next 30 years, and roughly where they all live. So by incorporating this information into the model as constraints, we can make the model feed them. We also included, for example, making the model protect large swaths of primary forest and biodiversity hotspots, and mitigation measures for pollution and emissions, among many other things. So as outcome variables, we wanted to, it was another wide array of things. So we looked at undernutrition, deaths from dietary chronic diseases, biodiversity, nitrogen pollution, water flow violations, emissions, and the resultant warming, poverty, and employment in agriculture. So to just describe the framework a bit, all these models in here, before kind of discussing why this is so helpful for answering big questions. So the model that I work on is called MAGPIE, and it's a partial equilibrium model of the agricultural sector. It uses as input biogeophysical data sets to constrain agriculture and land use practices, when coupled with input assumptions such as future food demand and levels of climate mitigation. LPGML is a crop model that supplies MAGPIE with input data sets like crop and grass yield potentials, carbon densities, and water availability under future climate change. REMIND is a model of the energy and transportation system that helps us produce consistent warming projections, particularly with MAGIC, which is a reduced complexity climate model. The food demand model gives us people's diets as input to MAGPIE. This is a way in which we can systematically vary countries' diets based on where they stand now and consistent assumptions about future change. The poverty model, as you may have guessed, gives us a glimpse into how different measures affect poverty, and the dietary health model estimates how many people die from diet-related chronic diseases like diabetes and heart disease. So what can such complicated model frameworks get you? To illustrate this, I'd like to just start with one of the core measures inside of our framework. So one of the most important things we did is we transitioned the world from our current diets, which are really unhealthy and also very meat-driven, to an Eat Lancet healthy reference diet. Important here is a strong decrease in livestock products. In 2050, we've decreased average intake from about 500 calories per day to 170. And within our modeling framework, this is the wide-ranging impacts of such a seemingly simple intervention on the food system. I'm now going to go step by step through this plot to kind of give you a sense of how each model has its own little piece in it. So our dietary transition begins with a food demand model. This model simulates a shift in demand away from meat products. This demand is then used as input to MAGPIE at the core of the model framework. The food demand model also reports future population, sex, age, and BMI distributions per country based on SSP assumptions, which I will discuss later, and regressions on empirical data sets. Specifically for the diet shift, we see that by assuming diets rich in legumes, fruits, vegetables, nuts, and seeds, and relatively low in meat products, lowers obesity, and if you give them to everyone, eliminates undernutrition. The dietary health model takes these diet patterns and estimates how many people are dying prematurely each year from diet and weight-related diseases. It uses a comparative risk assessment based on empirical data sources like the global burden of disease. It shows us specifically that healthier diets greatly reduce premature mortality. This next part is MAGPIE and using LPGML data. So it demonstrates that when you reduce livestock production, you also reduce demand for their fodder. These two things together reduce pasture and cropland. The pasture and cropland that's needed to feed humanity significantly. This in turn frees up significant land for other purposes, most importantly, stuff like increasing forested land. These forests will harbor future biodiversity, but also sink significant levels of carbon from the atmosphere. So importantly here is also numerous other benefits, like fewer livestock means reduced enteric fermentation, reduced nitrogen pollution, reduced water usage, and fewer emissions from deforestation used to generate new cropland and pasture as we into the 2050s. So then here we take all of the emissions from Magpie and combine them with Remind, which is the energy and transportation sectors, to estimate consequences for global warming. So going through that big plot, I hope that I motivated the rationale for such comprehensive and complicated integrated assessments. If it wasn't for this larger framework, we would be hopeless to see with such a wide range of diverse impacts of the food system transformation in an internally consistent way. Okay. Right, brief tangent. So I'd like to also touch on a topic that undergirds a lot of models within this space, the shared socioeconomic pathways. Before the SSPs were created, climate research had a lot of trouble integrating potential socioeconomic changes into the research. Moreover, it was difficult to understand and compare model outputs with one another because it was less clear what input assumptions were going into each model. So business as usual to me might be something very different from business as usual to you. So since their creation, the SSPs have been taken up very rapidly and are now fundamental to much of the work of, for example, the IPCC. They're a set of shared assumptions based on an ongoing consensus exercise within the community that propose an array of possible futures for the 21st century. So this group of researchers also produce standardized numeric inputs that are that align with these futures, and these are commonly used as drivers within the integrated assessment models. They are also narratives for orienting assumptions within the models. These narratives guide independent modeling groups in designing their own internal scenario assumptions and give the community both the structure needed to enable comparison between the models, but also the flexibility to ensure that all models, which are predictions of the future, don't simply converge on the same answer. So you want a diversity of models and therefore underlying assumptions, but we want them to start from the same shared understanding, the same starting point, so that we aren't just lost in confusion about apples and oranges. So I won't go into the gamut. It's not so important. But SSP1 is kind of a sustainable future. It's called taking the green road. SSP2 is business as usual, middle of the road. And SSP3 is called taking the rocky road, and it's high challenges to mitigation and adaptation. So now I'm just going to quickly read what the SSP2 baseline text is, because I think it's kind of interesting to understand the narrative sense of this. So the world follows a path in which social, economic, and technological trends do not shift markedly from historical patterns. Development and income growth proceeds unevenly, with some countries making relatively good progress while others fall short of expectations. Global and national institutions work toward but make slow progress in achieving sustainable development goals. Environmental systems experience degradation, although there are some improvements, and the overall intensity of resource use and energy use declines. Global population growth is moderate and levels off in the second half of the century. Income inequality persists or improves, but only slowly, and challenges to reducing vulnerability to society and environmental changes remain. So this text is literally in the original paper and guides modelers so that they can understand what a middle-of-the-road scenario is when they design their model's internal assumptions. So when you encounter an SSP2 scenario in the wild, you can trust to a greater degree that the creators of the data set have roughly the same idea as you about what that means. Okay, so conclusions. I hope that I've made clear for a case for the possible benefits of a multi-model framework. Comprehensive frameworks reveal multidimensional impacts in a consistent way, and thus they're increasingly important for bridging environmental, economic, and health systems. They come with their own suite of hazards, though, that I'm still only learning myself through experience. But I've made enough mistakes to at least be able to give some reflections. So first and foremost, each model brings with it assumptions and caveats. Coupling the models compounds them. Important is that some of the assumptions are interplay, and the methodologies interplay, and how these kind of interact with each other can be really subtle. Addressing this is a field in and of itself, and I don't think anyone and me have a great answer for controlling these inconsistencies and reducing the uncertainties completely. But the SSPs, and that's the reason why I talked about them, are a way that the community has kind of sought to approach this challenge. Further, in communicating the results from these large modeling frameworks, it's often really difficult to caveat and describe such multidimensional findings. The supplement for the paper that this analysis is part of is about 200 pages long. So most people, even those who are very intimately aware of the work itself, have an incomplete picture of what's really going on. And then secondly, many models and partners, having many models and partners can lead to mistakes stemming from misguided assumptions about how the various models work and who's actually responsible for knowing how they work or should be coupled, how they should be coupled together. And I have some personal and maybe a little embarrassing experience with this that I could share during the discussion. Okay. So, and thank you to the funders of EPSEC. It was 13 minutes. I'm sorry.
No, thank you very much. This was indeed very enlightening and helpful, and a bunch of questions already popping up because it's super exciting to work with such a huge suite of models. And we'll talk a little bit more on that during the discussion as well. Thank you, Michael, for summarizing EPSEC for us. We move on to our last and final speaker, Avinash Kishore. Avinash's talk is a bit diverging from all the model-related conversations you've heard so far. So Avinash is Senior Research Fellow at the International Food Policy's New Delhi office in India. He has a PhD in Public Policy from Harvard University, and Avinash also works at the intersection of food, energy, water, land nexus primarily amongst various topics. He's from India, again highlighting that. Avinash's talk is going to be more wide-ranging about managing and collecting primary data across disciplines, and learning from colleagues from other disciplines, publishing interdisciplinary papers and careers outside academia. He's mentored several young research over the years like me, so it would be really fascinating to hear Avinash's perspective on this topic. Thank you, Avinash. You can start now.
Okay. Thanks, Vartika. So I am going to, like Vartika said, I'm going to talk on 3 topics, time permitting. So I'll first talk about my own experience with interdisciplinary research. Everything I'm going to say, obviously, is from my subjective experience. And I know a lot of people who have had different experiences too. So take it with that caveat. So I did an MBA. My first training was to go serve farmers and build and professionally manage their cooperatives. But promptly ended up joining International Water Management Institute, a researcher, partly because I thought selling ideas was more fun. It sounded more exciting than selling milk and milk products, which is what I would have done if I hadn't joined a research institute, at least as my first job. And my first major project was on energy irrigation nexus. And as a part of that paper, so clearly 2 different streams were coming together, though not necessarily 2 different disciplines. And I think I am co-author of a paper that may have coined that term, energy irrigation nexus. I didn't coin it, my co-author did. And just to share an experience that one of the reviewers of that report commented that the authors it was an EME research report, but peer-reviewed, that the authors forget that W in IME stands for water, not watts. So why I'm bringing this up is basically I am trained in economics and try to do mostly work in economics, even when I'm doing interdisciplinary, is that quote unquote rigorous researchers may sometimes look down upon inter or transdisciplinary research, particularly in early careers. Not everyone does, but that happens, especially if you are trained as an economist and targeting top economics journals. You'll see that their representation or presentation of interdisciplinary papers are quite uncommon, if not rare, because these journals, especially the high-ranking ones, are looking to test a theory. So particulars of a case interest them less, and they want, even if there's something that is situated in one location where multiple facets are interacting, they want to use this case study to learn something broader, something worth hearing. So that's more common in economics, I guess less common in other disciplines. But with that said, I have continued to do it, partly because it's a lot of fun to interact with people from other disciplines that have other norms, etc. And often it's also essential. So when I'm doing energy, I continue to work on water and energy, electricity, diesel supply, and how that influences water use, how that influences cropping patterns, etc. I do work with hydrologists, and that enriches my work. And they sometimes reach out to me because they want to understand how economic incentives affect water use when water table is depleting or not depleting, etc. So it's absolutely essential. It's a lot of fun, and I think at times if you don't bring interdisciplinary perspectives, you may end up with wrong conclusions, or even the whole premise may be wrong. So for example, one project that Vartika and I have worked together with other people was looking at why farmers over-apply urea or under-apply it in India, and can we design extension, basically scientific fertilizer use recommendations to persuade farmers to move there. And in that project, a bunch of us who were working on it were economists, and we didn't even know that for urea, broadly, you don't even need to do a soil test. If you know the yield, crop yield, don't grill me on these points. I learned it only from my soil scientist and crop scientist colleagues. You basically can come up with a recommendation as simple as that. So without that, you would have gone through a complex process of testing, worrying about testing quality, etc., when the reality is simple. So and then what are the dose responses, how crops respond when someone over applies or under applies or deviates from the optimum. All those things were important because they would set incentives. They would mark what farmers perceived or actual risks are. So many, many things that we work, especially in natural resource management, but also in food systems, you have to be interdisciplinary. Now, you learn more, you look at other ways of doing things, but there are some interesting experiences too. So, I think one is the disciplinary norms can be very different, right? So science journals, when I work with my colleagues to submit papers to science journals, they often want one result, not always, but often. And the way paper is structured, the way authorship is shared, all those norms in science journals are very, very different compared to, let's say, economics, which is I consider to my home discipline. Economics papers over time are getting longer and longer, and each paper would have several results and any number of robustness checks. Even the way papers are written is the introduction will summarize the whole paper, and then the rest of the paper will, to a science, my friends who work in health and nutrition or agronomy, etc., they find when I write a first draft, if I say using economics, they find it repetitive and it irritates them. Another place where I have struggled and I'm just learning is their economics paper where they collaborate with me, and their science papers targeted to science journal where I'm collaborating with them, let's say, the norms of who counts as a co-author are very different. And as a result, what happens is, as economists, you want more substantive contribution to earn authorship, and economics papers won't have like 12, 15, 16, 50 co-authors. So as economists, if you're leading the paper or you're one of the co-leads, you end up coming out as a meaner person because you're less generous in acknowledging other people's contribution. You put them in footnotes and not as co-authors. So these are some of the things. I don't think they're like set solutions around that. It's just that being respectful to other disciplines, being appreciating their norms, and communicating clearly. I think those are the things that help you continue your relationship with other people while without creating any problems. The review process also varies. I enjoy working on science journals and journals that are not economics, partly because the review is so much more faster and often kinder. So that's very briefly my experience so far on working with other disciplines. And when I say science, I'm including ag-related things and also health and nutrition. One more thing that's interesting is, especially when I work with my health and nutrition colleagues, they have very precise meanings of terms. Economics, as Paul Krugman said, is half the science. We care about sign and significance of coefficients, but not the size. And in that sense, it varies from some of the harder sciences that are out there. And as a result, we sometimes compare to, let's say, what a nutritionist would do, play fast and loose with the way we use terms and terminology, etc. And that can be irritating to your nutritionist colleague. And you may have to explain or adjust, and just keeping open lines of communication is what has helped me continue with the collaborations that I have had. And I have had co-authors from other disciplines with whom I have written more than one papers now. So it seems to be working. I'm changing track a little bit. And the second part Vartika asked me to talk about is, how do you collect, like when you're conducting primary surveys, economists do it a lot, other disciplines do it too. How do you collect data when you're trying to have multiple disciplines, and how do you go about conceptualizing, designing, etc.? And I'll use just one example. Recently, under a CGIAR project, we were trying to do integrated food system survey. And by integrated, we wanted to do collect data on production, on consumption, on diets, on markets, on how production affects natural resources, and in turn is affected by climate shocks, weather events, etc. So one of the biggest challenge was, and there are people who are going to work together on papers and also independently with their areas of interest. That was the idea. Is the first challenge that we faced when we're doing this kind of integrated survey where several disciplines and people from different are coming together, is keeping the survey short, because everyone is super passionate about their area of interest and wants to ask as many questions as possible. And then in the process, the first draft of the questionnaire was like 100 pages long. And how do we come to an agreement to make sure that we don't exploit our respondents was the first challenge we face. And I don't think there is any neat resolution. So what we had to do, what helped us, is to have a conceptual framework, like there are several food systems framework, and come to an agreement that even though it's an integrated survey, diets will be at the center of it. So we'll connect everything to how do they affect diets or are affected by diets. So that kind of clarity, that agreement didn't come easily, because if you're working on water, you want to look at water depletion, water use, water markets, machines, and whatnot. And then diet itself, it can be complex too. So one, using a conceptual framework helped a great deal. Two, coming to an agreement that one survey, one data collection effort cannot answer every question. Now let's have one central message or one central focus theme, even if it is an integrated food system survey, is interesting. And it helped us. Like I said, norms vary. So in nutrition, in health, there is a tradition of using validated tools. By tools, I mean survey modules. So everyone knows what those modules are, and you just plug and play with that with minor adjustments. And then you explain why you are making adjustments. In other disciplines, including in agronomy or agriculture, it seems to me they didn't have, certainly economics and other social sciences, there hasn't been such a tradition of validated modules that are used by everyone, etc. And that just creates, if I want to say, a little bit more anarchy, though it does give you more degrees of freedom. And as a result, ends up putting pressure. So you'll see economists, when they field their surveys, they end up being longer and longer compared to many other disciplines. So those norms vary, and it's important to come to an agreement as to how. And if you're coming from nutrition or public health field, you get frustrated because you're like, what does this term mean? In nutrition, a term like diet diversity, there are like 3, 4, 5 definitions. It's that kind of diet diversity, and everyone knows it, and it's clear, and you can go to a website and find what that means, like commonly agreed upon. Other fields, it's not there, and that can create frustrations, and again, that needs to be resolved. Now we did manage, I think we're quite successful in data collection. Some groups would have wanted more questions. Now a new thing is happening is, there's a big team working on this data, which has data on data set, which is production, consumption, markets, environment, social safety nets, all these things, is what kind of papers do we want to write? So it's easy. It would be counterproductive or not that great if we each wrote paper that, like if I'm an economist and I wrote a paper only on markets and a nutritionist wrote paper only on diet diversity, etc., that would defeat the purpose of having an integrated survey. The idea was to look at connections between different things. And there again, we are in a process of figuring out how do we, people will write papers based on their own data sets, own modules, etc. But how do we avoid duplication? How do we create cross-functional, cross-disciplinary teams? Because there's rigorous standards also vary. Economists are after causal identification. In nutrition and health, causal identification often means either a natural experiment or a randomized controlled trial. But even top journals will publish good analytical descriptive papers too, right? So we are in the process of negotiating it. And I am sorry that I do not have a more concrete, like a step-by-step pathway to how to come to an agreement and how to continue this agreement. I think mutual respect and continuous dialogue. So one of the things we have done is all the papers that we will write, we have a standard format for concept note, which lays out what modules of data you'll use, what correlations you will explore, a little bit on what methodology, and we are presenting it to each other and getting critique even from people who may not be like from that particular area. And that kind of communication is helping us avoid duplication, is helping us form cross teams. So giving it a little bit of structure and having these structured engagements, communications, apart from informal friendship, those are the most valuable ones, is what helps when you are designing the survey or this kind of data collection effort and integrating it. My last point is, after my PhD, I joined IFPRI, which is a non-academic, but like non-teaching academic position. There, I'll just talk very quickly about some of the pluses and minuses of this work. So one, in working like in an institution like IFPRI or any other CG centers, is you get increasingly research is moving, a lot of research is moving towards empirical work in economics and in other disciplines. So there are a lot of opportunities when you work in a place like IFPRI to collect your own data, carry out your own experiment. So it's great. It's a great place if you are an empirical researcher. And it's not just that you're working here and I'm sitting in Delhi. I have a lot of opportunities to collaborate with economists, scientists in top universities across the world, because they are also looking for opportunities of people who are sitting on the ground, who are sitting in the countries where research is happening, where data collection is happening, and leveraging opportunities for experiment, etc. Okay, that's one. On the flip side, if you're in a university, you have a constant stream of PhD and master's candidates, students who bring in a lot of ideas. There's a great pool of what's it called? Fresh ideas, etc. And this is a constant churn. In our institutions, we hire RA. They're very bright, extremely hardworking. But that kind of constant inflow may not be there, right? On the other side, you can focus your entire time on research, barring a little bit of administrative responsibility that is everywhere, and you do not have teaching load. Some people who love teaching may miss it, but it does free up a lot of time. Not having to teach frees up a lot of time for research and even mentoring. One of the downsides, unlike universities, is that even after 15, 20, 25 years of work, there isn't a tenure in these research institutions. I have been here for 12 years. I foresee myself staying on for long, but you have to raise your own resources, or someone has to raise resources for you to cover your time. Otherwise, you may be let go of even after a long time. So that kind of insecurity may not be, some people may not appreciate it, right? So you have to continue to raise your own resources. And I guess that's somewhat true for academic positions too. One more thing that I want to talk is the publication cycle in these project-oriented institutions is shorter. And that especially becomes a challenge for economists because economics papers can take sometimes years and even decades from first draft to publication. Here at IFPRI, the general expectation is I'll publish 2 papers a year. And one strategy that works for people is they write some quick papers that they publish in lower tier journals or mid-tier journals, and then while continuing to have a pipeline of more serious, more rigorous work that may take more than a year or 2 years to publish. So that's something that I have done. That's something that I know many other colleagues have done, and that's for people who are just doing PhD or coming. This is my last point, Vartika. Is in IFPRI, at least you are encouraged to publish your dissertation papers, even if you are hired to work on a project that may not be related to dissertation topic. That's something everyone understands. We have all been through this phase, and you are supported and encouraged to do that. In a way, you may have to work double shift, that you may still have to do work on the project that you're hired, but that's something encouraged and appreciated. It's not that those publications won't count for your review, etc. I'll stop here. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Avinash. And your last points were extremely relevant for highlighting careers outside academia. And IFPRI is a great place to work for. I can vouch that too. The point that I liked of what you said is around, like working with building capacity within countries and within in-house. I think that is the point that Aline began with. One of the reasons how Fable Consortium also works is you work with teams who are based in countries, and their capacity development is more important rather than teams working in like one region or one institution and trying to model results for Cambodia, whereas, not knowing the context of Cambodia for that matter. So thank you very much, all the speakers, for your wonderful insights. There's a very active chat room ongoing with a lot of questions from Michael that he's responding to. But I think there are a couple of questions that I would like to direct to Aline and Avinash, respectively. I mean, the people who've asked those questions haven't specified who they wanted to ask this of, but I will use my discretion there. So Aline, I think there's a couple of points from Prapti Barua on this varied political and socioeconomic context when doing transdisciplinary research. Is how do we work with differences to come up with policy solutions in those countries? How do I identify which stakeholders to work with in regions? And also the related question to that was if there are any geographies that are relatively easier to work in terms of data availability or influencing policies. So anything that you can highlight from your experience would be helpful there. Thank you.
Yeah, I think indeed, like the stakeholder mapping might be important. Also, very often, sometimes when you work on a project, then there is some kind of counterpart, like the Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Environment, or kind of the main benefiter that who then advise on who to involve in this consultation. But I would say that, for example, for Fable, it also depended, right, on a mix of existing connections, personal connections, so where it's easier to start, and then also a mix of being active in trying to engage with some people that are particularly influential or on a certain topic, on your topic. But maybe like in terms of where it is easier or harder to work, so first of all, probably what I will say will have some bias, because for me, with my cultural background as a French and so on, of course, there might be some cultural places where it's easier for me because it's closer to my own culture. So this, please pardon me. But otherwise, I still think that a geography where I found it was particularly difficult, for example, to work was the Congo Basin area. And maybe what I can say there is lack of data. Right, so your statistics are not working very well or not maintained for a long time and so on. So you have a lot of gaps and frankly, very poor information, or sometimes very hard to access because they are politically sensitive. So even the population census was not easy to share. And then second, you have also institutes, local institutes, which are not well funded, right? University salaries are not paid for months and so on. So it's very hard for people to engage also on a project full time because they have to diversify to limit their risks. And finally, the political will. Then when there is no change for a long time, it's quite hard to see also how to influence like the policy making decision. Maybe another aspect that would make things a bit harder to navigate is when you have like very big conflicts across different ministries, and then it's hard to see who to talk to because then you are seen as an enemy from the other side. And second, maybe when you have a very decentralized system, which is probably also great in some occasions, but then it makes also hard to identify what is the right level or multiple level where you need to interact. So I'm thinking just, for example, as Indonesia now as a terms of organization.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Aline. Connected to the same point, Avinash, on, there's a question on how do we manage conflicts between different partners and different groups. And it's not always easy, but are there instances where it's been more difficult or otherwise? Do you want to elaborate a little bit on that?
So
like data collection, yeah.
So data collection, yes, there has been conflict. Like I mentioned, this TAFSA survey, it ended up being a lot more about diets. And TAFSA, by the way, instruments are online. You can go and take a look at it. Even the data are online, and we encourage anyone who wants to use it. It's from Bangladesh, India, and Nepal. So people who are interested in production and environment and impact of climate shocks, which a lot of you work, those questions and those modules ended up being shorter. And there was a little bit of disaffection, but then everyone realized that we could not have everything in there. And we sat down and discussed how each group or even people with their respective interest could find a pathway to papers that may be interesting. May not exactly be what they wanted to start to do from the beginning, but they saw a pathway to papers that will be interesting, that will be exciting, that will be new, and that so I think that's I wish there was a formula to it, but I guess talking to each other and give and take, which happens in any group, is there are places, for example, the diet people who care about diets would have wanted a far more detailed module, actual weighing and etc. foods, and they also had to come up with tools modules that ended up doing less rigorous, less careful measurement, if you like, of actual quantities of different foods eaten. So give and take happened, and everyone should be, we are all researchers, we want to publish papers, everyone should see a clear pathway to papers that would excite them. And if we can figure it out together, that's what we did. I guess that helped resolve the conflict. There may still be a little bit of heartburn, but I guess that works in any joint family, bigger team, everywhere that happens, and we learn how to manage that. I don't think there are any perfect solutions to it.
Thank you. Thank you for having us remember about our heartburns. So this was very good. There are a lot of questions for Michael. So I'm not going to select each of those, but I think there's one thing that both Michael and Aline can first talk about is dashboards, because I believe these are equally relevant for your work. There was a question from Shweta Gupta on, if there's any publicly accessible dashboard which allows users to see what happens to outcomes if we change certain values. Maybe Aline first, and then we go to Michael with all the other questions as well. Thank you.
Yes, thanks. So indeed, for Fable, what we try is to have an online dashboard to show the different results and to let also people explore a bit more the results that we have from our different joint exercise that we call Senaton. So if you just go to senaton.org, you see that. I think that then after the next step is to really allow interactive, changing scenarios, assumptions, and so on, and seeing then the impact. It's not done yet, but probably in the future.
Thank you, Aline. Michael, you want to respond to the dashboard? And then all of these other questions, I mean, you can select, you've responded in the chat box, but other things such as boundaries of all these models. And then I have another question as well afterwards.
Yeah, there is no dashboard for the FSEC scenarios that was talked about. And it would certainly be a good idea. The problem is that we all have so many things going on in our own little, ongoing tasks that public outreach is often the thing that, unless you're specifically getting paid to do it, gets dropped to the wayside because there are so many other responsibilities that are more pressingly important for your career and scientific output. That's not necessarily a satisfying answer. So if you want to make a dashboard, we could give you the data. I hope that I made a good attempt at answering the questions that were asked to me in the chat already. I don't have anything necessarily that I would like to add. Maybe if any of the people who asked questions thought I didn't do a good job answering them, then they could ask me again and I can try to do a better job to answer them.
Michael, say something about the surprises. So you went into this anticipating diet change will be beneficial and whatnot. Many things were anticipated, but there were undoubtedly some surprises. Could you speak to that from a personal perspective?
So I think that the most surprising thing for me was that, like, I mean, these scenarios are utopian, but they are also based on equations taken from the literature and, you know, put into this model that are actually trying to, constrain what's actually possible. So they're utopian, but they're bounded by the biogeophysical and technological limitations that we have been able to garner from both, you know, the how much nitrogen fertilizer you need in order to grow 1 hectare of wheat or whatever in a certain place at a certain time. And of course, like, we could come up with lots of crazy ideas about technological change, especially, you know, today, but within reasonable bounds, specific things, you actually can't really do that much better, or the nitrogen boundary is one example of this, regardless of, you know, what we had very utopian assumptions about improving nitrogen uptake efficiency, et cetera. And we have very optimistic assumptions about people relinquishing their meat intake for the betterment of society. But even so, we will fail to actually meet the boundary, the planetary boundary for nitrogen pollution globally. For me, but that's both, you know, like crap, but also an interesting confirmation that, like, these models are actually really working insofar as, like, you have the rules as we've been able to scientifically gather so far, and of course they always change over time and, you know, subject to error, but like there's real math that constrains all of this change. And I don't know, I mean, I'm still rather new to this. I came to this, I switched careers, and I found that very cool in a way, and concerning, but cool too. The other thing is actually still the diet change. I mean, as I said, I'm relatively new to this field, and just looking at the enormous cascade that a shift of diet does in freeing up land to actually accomplish our other goals. Of course, when you say that, just, you know, as a verbal argument, I can totally, like, say, yeah, that sounds reasonable. But when you look at the numbers, it's actually somewhat terrifying, because that puts a lot of pressure on society to change and culture to change in a very short amount of time, because it's really key to all of our goals as a society. Yeah, maybe other things will occur to me too, but those are my two initial answers.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, all the speakers. I don't see any additional questions, but if anyone has, you can feel free to raise your hands, and then we can see, or we could also close early.
One more question for the speakers. Have you read anything recently in this space that you found compelling or informative? Avinash, on the interdisciplinary, these collaborations. I guess you're speaking from the economist side. Economists are notably difficult in this area, but have you read anything recently on that? Aline, have you read anything inspiring in this area of trying to do good things for your country, but respect planetary boundaries. That's an interesting tension. And Michael, also, anything that you would recommend for this audience of things to read or podcasts even that you think speak to these issues?
No, go ahead, Ali. I'll be honest, I haven't. This is a very good question, Tom. Like, have I ever read anything on how to do interdisciplinary research? No, I haven't. It just gives an idea that maybe there is material out there. You would know because you have been running a coalition for forever, a mega one, several one of them. I think I have learned from watching, but one is like my PhD advisor was Dale Jorgensen. He used to run this mega coalition of sorts of getting GDP data better across many countries, including India. I worked with Rob Stevens, again, was part of some coalitions. I've looked at very interesting work that people have been doing, both on the research side and impact work. So you just look at it and you admire how so many people came together. So for example, I was part of a research group which was hosted at Stanford on blue foods. And it had like not amazing array of people who work on like fisheries experts in ocean capture fisheries and aquaculture. And then you had economists and modelers and people who cared about ethical issues, etc. And this was a big group, met several times, and has produced a series of papers. And so I think experience has taught me more, but it would be a great idea to read up on other people who may have reflected, people like you and others who may have reflected on these processes and written about their experience. I haven't done that myself. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Thanks, Avinash. I'd like to hear from the others, but this is also something that GLASSNET could potentially do if there's a gap here. You in particular, you as speakers who've done an excellent job here, I think could, let's brainstorm a little bit, online, offline, whatever, bilaterally, but think about how could we make these experiences more broadly available. And it could be recordings. We could snip out some of these recordings, but also write-ups. I think you're speaking to important issues here, and we need to communicate that to the community. Aline, you have any thoughts?
I have to say that I don't read enough in general, but maybe just some thoughts about what is happening in Europe now, because there have been some assessments, and we have very detailed models about all the policies which are in place for agriculture in Europe, with IFPRI, for example, and which is also used really for policy advice and so on. But also because of the characteristics of this model and also some of the limitations and gaps which are normal because it doesn't cover everything. It had been used a lot by the lobbyists from the agricultural side to push against the Farm to Fork and EU Green Deal, because they always pointed on, oh, it will increase the prices so much and we will lose the competitiveness of Europe compared to the rest of the world. And this was the best argument they could find ever. So I think for me, it was just a reminder that I think that maybe more than one study would be great if, for example, for this case of Europe, like we really start with different models and trying to have an answer, which is a bit better than what just one single study with IFPRI could do, with really a lot of details and good job in terms of trying to implement all these positives in the model.
And I'd jump in and quickly say that that's a great starting point. Perhaps, thank you, Tom, for bringing up that question. That's something that we can all reflect in our work and also try and see if we could maybe write a blog or a piece together that highlights the strengths of some of this work, but also the challenges and how do we deal with that. I'd be happy to take it ahead again in the middle of all the 200 things, but yes, can do it. Yeah, we are a couple of minutes over time, and do you want to close, Tom, or do you want me to do it?
Sure. I'd like to thank you, Vartika. For all of you out there, it is not easy to put together one of these things with busy people. Aline, Michael, Avinash, I'm sure have a million things to do. Thank you for sharing your time and thoughts with us. I thought it was really useful. I really enjoyed the presentations and the discussion. Thanks to everyone who attended. And yeah, Vartika, thanks for having the vision to put this together and orchestrating it so nicely. Thank you.
And I quickly just add, aside from thanking all the speakers and Tom for giving me this opportunity and the GLASSNET Fellowship last year, my colleagues Edna and David Chen from PIC, who also supported the thought process along the way. So thank you, everybody. Have a great
Thanks,
rest of the
Vartika.
evening.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.